Hello and welcome to our weekly Parsha share. This week's Parsha is the last Parsha in the book of Parshas, Parshas Vayechi. And Parshas Vayechi, of course, is full of brachas and the story of the last days of Yaakov Avinu, last moments of Yaakov Avinu's life. Interestingly, when I wrote the notes for the share, which I was glancing at before, I gave it a title, A Date with Death. And intriguingly, there is, and those of you who have joined me in these shir over the years will undoubtedly have heard me quote several times the remarkable thing by somebody called the Ramomi Pano, famous Italian Kabbalist, who says that before we are born, we are taken into a large room. It's perhaps a little bit like a ladies' store that sells dresses or a gentleman's store that sells suits, and the garments are all hanging there on racks, and you can get to select the pattern that you like, the style, the material, etc. Um, Look at the price, try it on, make your choice. It's not clothes, however, it's lives. Says the Ramami Pan, you got to choose your life. And in the trying it on and looking at it, you got to see, as it were, to carry on the metaphor, you got to see exactly what that life like. You got to see the garment. You got to see exactly what it was like, where you would be born, who your parents would be, who your siblings would be. Um, all of that was shown to you before you came here, and you chose this life. Similarly, the almost exact same thing is said by Rabbeinu Bachya in his commentary on the Torah, when the Torah is talking about making a fence around the roof of the flat roof of your house so nobody falls and kills themselves. He says the exact same thing, and he adds you were shown how long you were going to live, when you would die, and how you would die. All that was shown to you. So the bits of your life full of bracha, the bits of your life full of sadness, etc. All of that, which is more than intriguing, but that's only shown to you after you pass away. Sorry, before you come to this world. Before you come to this world, then you get to see all of that. But when you're in this world, that of course isn't shown to you. Well, then of course you would have no freedom of choice. Talking of which, we're talking of brachas and sadness. We usually start off this year, and I omitted to do so, by dedications for people who either are celebrating a simcha, or it's to commemorate somebody who's passed away, or to pray or to dedicate the share for people who need a refuah shlema. So this week is for people who need a refuah shlema, and that is Chaim Mordechai Dov ben Esther, ben Yom Zev ben Yafa Hene Yenta, Rafal Chai ben Sarah, Chana Malka bas Leah Gittel, Orech Chaim ben Chani Yehudis, Rochel Levana bas Shirley, Malka bas Fega Chaya, and Elio Yaakov ben Esther. They should all have it in Fushlim. And if you'd like to dedicate the share to celebrate some wonderful Jewish simcha, bar mitzvah, wedding, engagement, if you'd like to commemorate somebody who's passed away, or if you'd like the share to hopefully play a part in the Fushlim for somebody, please contact me at yy@askrabbiyyy.com, yy@askrabbiyyy.com. I should also warn you that I have a heavy cold, and this week's share is sponsored by Kleenex. I have a big box waiting for me and two tissues ready. In fact, I think I'm going to authenticate this with an authentic sneeze any second, but maybe hopefully not. So maybe it'd be a good idea for you to sit a little bit further back from the computer. Right. So basically, as I said, the heading of here is a date with death, and that's really how the parsha starts. So let's look at the parsha, and it begins obviously by talking about Yaakov's life. Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim, and Yaakov lived in the land of Mitzrayim after the discovery that Yosef was alive. He lives there for Sheva Esr Shana, for 17 years. Now, if you combine 17 years in Mitzrayim with the 130 years that he lived outside Mitzrayim, I will have to blow my nose, please forgive me. And then, of course, you get me 147, which is what the Pasuk says. By he, you mean Yaakov, and it was that the life of Yaakov, Shnei Chayav, and the years of his life, were Sheva Shanim v'Arba Mea Shana. 7 years and 140 years, so 147 altogether. And then, hence the title I gave this year, Vayikra Vayimei Yisrael Musa, and the days of Israel approached towards his death, or moved towards his death. Vayikra Lebano Yosef, he called to son Yosef, Yomaloi Im Nomas As Benecha, to find favor in your eyes, in your role as king of Egypt. Please put your hand under my thigh, my leg, and do with me chesed and emes, I'll not bring with Mitzrayim, and do not allow me to be buried in Mitzrayim. That's the famous request that Yaakov makes of his son Yosef. Interestingly, here in Koftes, when he says when it says Yikro Yimei Yisrael Mus, the days of Israel came near to his death, there's an intriguing Ramban. The Ramban says, just a very factual observation, that's to say, Kasher Kiva Yimei Yisrael Mus Korah Leban Yosef, he called his son Yosef when he was coming to die, but who the Shona Hachrona Liyomov, and that was in the last year of his life. The Inyona, and the idea was Ki Hargish Ba'atzmoya Afisas HaKoichas VeYisurin HaChabusha, a decrease in his strength and an increase in his feelings of tiredness, old age, in other words. He didn't know exactly he was going to die, but he knew that he felt it was approaching. Okay? Hence the title, A Date with Death. The Baal HaTurim, the commentator here, he says, usually just specializes in little gematrias, but here he says something more at length, and he says, based on Masaros, this expression, Vayikra Yimei Yisrael, there's another expression almost identical, only it's talking to somebody else, and it's instead of being Vayikra Yimei Yisrael, days of Israel came near to dying, it's Vayikra Yimei David Lumus. And that's interesting. Sorry, I jumped along the wrong line. It's a Medrash. The Medrash says, Omer Kadosh Baruch Hu David. Hashem said to David, David HaMelech, Ata Asisa Kuf Mem Zayin Ben Samarim, you wrote 147 Psalms, Tehillim, Communion Shalos Yaakov, which is, of course, as we just said, the exact same number as the days of life of Yaakov Avinu. Tiska Kamoyasoi. So you will have the same zchus, the same merit, will be rewarded in the same way as he was. Mahu Ubonov Malko Biachad, just like he and his son would reign at the same time, or I think it really means the same period, because there weren't two kings at the same time. Av Ato Yimloch Shlomo Bincha Bichayecha. Then you and your son will live at the same time, right? You'll live, as it were, just handing over your kingship to your son Shlomo. So interesting parallel of Yaakov and David HaMelech. We're going to carry that parallel on a little bit further because our theme is more close than that, because we're talking about dying. David HaMelech was also interested and felt that his days were approaching, that he was going to die. And this is reported intriguingly in the Gemara in Shabbos and Daf Lamed Omid Aleph, which I have here, ready to read to you, to prove I'm a properly qualified rabbi. The beautiful art scroll, which I adore, has the Hebrew translation on that page I'm showing you now, from the Aramaic, and the classics of the Gemara over there. It's very useful if you're saying a shir, as I am, to lots and lots of people, including, as I discover from those that contact me, Rabbonim and Talmudic Chachamim all over the world. Then I think it's essential to have this or something similar to it, which has the actual vowels for the Aramaic, because we Ashkenazi Jews are sometimes not as exact in the reading of the Aramaic as it should be. We often say Ein Hochinami, which is usually translated as indeed. And that's the Aramaic word phrase that comes up a lot in the Gemara. However, it's actually I Hochinami, but we don't quite say it that way. But we don't quite mind because we don't quite notice. But Sephardim do, and probably Israelis do. And the Kurds, whose natural language is Aramaic, they certainly would. But I don't think they object to my sharing too much. Anyway, so basically, on the translation side, it's got the translation, the Aramaic with the vowels. Can't go wrong. However, I'm going to actually read the traditional side, left side, if you'll as long as you're not accusing me of showing off. Omer Rav, the Omer of Yehuda, Omer Rav, Yehuda says in the name of Rav, my Dixiv, why does it say, and now we got a posset from Tehillim. Posset from Tehillim, and the posset Tehillim, if I just quickly jump down here, I'll tell you where that is. It is, yes, Lamed Tes, Tehillim Lamed Tes, hey. And there it says, Hodi'eni HaShem Kitzi. Please, Hashem, let me know the length of my life. Omidas Yomai, and the measure of my days, which seems to be the same thing. It's the length of my life, or the end of my days, or the number of days in my life. It's both the same thing. So again, Hodeni Hashem Kitzi, let me know when I'm going to die. Right, so that would tell me the length of my days. Omido Yomai, or let me see my the mida number of my days. Let's say it seems the same thing. Mahi Eda ma chodel ani, or Eda ma chodel ani, or what day am I going to die? So we'll see. We'll see this in the Gemara. It's really quite straightforward, and then we'll scratch our head a little bit and see if we can go a little bit deeper. So it says, Omar Rav, what does this pasuk that we just read? What does it mean? Omar David lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. David said to Hashem, Hu Rabbanu Shalom Almighty, Hodi'enu Hashem Kitzi. Tell me when I'm going to die. And Hashem said, Omar Loi, Gazerahi Melafonai. I made a rule in the creation of the world, or the operation of the world. And She'ein Madin Katzah Shel Bos V'Adam. Nobody gets to know when they're going to die. Now, as I said before, you did get to know before you came to the world. You don't get to know when you're in the world. See why in a second. Or I'll suggest a reason why in a minute. Omidas Yomai Mahi, and the amount of days, Himalafona, She'ein Madin Midas Yomai. So I said, well, how about, that was the next bit. How about, the length of my days? When I'm going to die, how about the length of my days? He says, no, I'm not going to tell you that either. Ma chodlani. So ma chodlani, as Rashi says that, maybe I should read the Rashis here. What does this mean? Kitzi hasidus labo alai. What's going to be at the end of my life? And Rashi translate that differently, which will start to solve the problem of the seeming repetition. Rashi says, no, it means kitzi hasidus labo alai. What's going to happen to me at the end? The Gemara says, no, it literally means the Quran says, tell me when I'm going to die. That's the first one. And it says the length of my days, which we said to be the same thing. But if Rashi translates it as what's going to happen to me at the end of my life, then that's something different. And then Midas Yomai, Kama Yemechaya. And then the next thing he's asking is, therefore, according to Rashi, not what's going to happen at the end, but how long is my life going to be? And then the third thing he asked for is, tell me which day I'm going to die. So Hashem says, no, I'm not going to tell you what's going to happen to the end of your life. No, I'm not going to tell you how long you're going to live. And no, you want to know what day you're going to die? All right, I'll tell you what day you're going to die. So that's where we go back to the Gemara and carry on the story. So he says to him, okay, but Shabbos, Thomas. So he says, you're going to die on Shabbos. So David HaMelech was going to die on Shabbos. David HaMelech didn't want to die on Shabbos. We'll see why in a second. The Echa b'Shabbos. So please, almost be Echa b'Shabbos. Let me die on Echa b'Shabbos. How about Sunday instead? Right? So, Omer Loi Kvar Hagia Malchus Shlomo ben Echa. Vein Malchus Diaz b'Chavert. I feel like I'm nominating. Sorry, I missed the thing. But hold on, I missed something. Shane Muddy Midas took away. So he says, let me die on Erev Shabbos. So he says, no, you can't die on Erev Shabbos. Why? Because I want you that I think if I read this again properly, this will be better. Shabbos, Thomas, you're going to die on Shabbos. Almost be'echad b'Shabbos. So let me die on echad b'Shabbos, on Sunday. That's when the reign of your son Shlomo begins. And the ein malachas nageas and we don't, I'd never allow one life which has got to end to carry on beyond its natural span into another tukufa, another era, epoch, where another king or another life takes over. And this is a famous saying of the rabbis. The sun of one life, sun doesn't set until the sunrise of another life takes over. So it's all perfectly matched, one life matching the other. I feel come in even for a moment. Therefore, he says, "I'm most Erev Shabbos." Okay, so if I can't die on Sunday, how about if I die on Friday? Omer loy ki toiv yom b'chatzrecha me'elef toiv li. Sorry, ki toiv yom b'chatzrecha me'elef toiv li yom echad she'ata yoshev ba'asek b'Torah me'elef oilas she'asid al shoma b'nechel ha'akriv b'fonai. So let me die, therefore, he says, instead of Sunday. How about Friday? He goes, no, it's more precious to me, the for you sitting and learning Torah as you do, and that Torah that you learn is more precious to me than the 1,000 oxes that your son Shlomo is going to plan to offer in the Beis Hamikdash in one day. And there we have it. There's the story. David HaMelech wanted to know when he was going to die. And Hashem said, I'm not going to tell you. I'll tell you the day, but I can't tell you any more than that. I wonder why. Well, I don't wonder why, because I heard this obviously. Well, I thought about why. I wondered why. And then I found, or I wanted to find an answer. And the answer is, if you know what day you're going to die, well, it's very intriguing. There's a famous story which was told to me a few years ago about something called Chaim Friedlander. I don't know if you can see this story over here on my shelf. Can you see this? Yes, you can. It shows up on the shelf. These are the story of Chaim Friedlander, who was the Ponevezh, Mishgiach Ponevezh Yeshiva, and was the one of the most famous Talmidim of Rabbi Dessler. And Rabbi Chaim Friedlander, my Chavrusa told me this story, and he said he didn't like it, and I loved it. Rabbi Chaim Friedlander was very ill at the end of his life, and he'd been to see the doctor, and the doctor told him he had only a few days left to live. So he came to Ponevezh Yeshiva, and he wanted to speak to Rav Shach, the Rosh Yeshiva, to ask him a question. Rav Shach was in a meeting with other Rabbonim of the Yeshiva discussing something. And so, realizing that he wasn't available, he waited outside while the meeting was going on. But one of the Bochrim in the Yeshiva saw that Rav Chaim Friedlander, obviously very frail and sick, was waiting there with the sort of impatience or chutzpah, and I mean that in a positive sense, of a young man, pushed the door open so that Rav Shach could see that it was Chaim Friedlander was there. So he came outside and basically he said, well, Chaim, what's going on? And so he said, look, I've only got a week to live. And I wanted to ask the Rosh Yeshiva, what should I do with my week? Interesting question. What should I do with my week? So he says, I've got a sefer. I've been writing his last work, obviously, a book, and it's nearly finished. So I could perhaps finish that, or I could prepare my little Dvar Torah, or my Torah that I have. There's a tradition that there's if you find a particularly juicy piece of Torah, your own chiddush, your own insight you've had from nobody else, keep one of them in your back pocket, as it were, for you to display when you get to heaven. That's a well-known custom. And so he said, or I could work on my Dvar Torah that I'm going to say when I get to Shema. I'm not sure which one I should work on. So Rav Shach said, don't work on either of them. Work in your midas. Work in your character refinement. Now, Rav Chaim Friedlander was a tzaddik, and Rav Shach was a tzaddik who knew that Rav Chaim Friedlander was a tzaddik. But as long as you hear, you can still improve yourself. You can still do more. A date with death is something which we find again in Parshas, and we find it with regards to in Parshas Vayechi, chapter Yud Ches. And this is towards the end of Sarah's life, not too far, but in the last chapters. But Avram was Sarah's Akinim boy beyond, and this was when the angels arrived to tell her she was going to have a baby in her 90s. Avram Sarah as a Canaan, Boim B'Yomim, Boim B'Yomim. Chadal, yes, the Sarah or a Kanoshim, and there was no way that in the natural scheme of things it was ever going to have a child. It's this Boim B'Yomim statement here, which is intriguing. What does it mean, Boim B'Yomim? And again, there's a very, very intriguing Ramban here. Boim B'Yomim. Listen to this. Ha'odam b'yimei bachrusov. A person in his or her life, in the young part of their life, Yikra oimed b'yomim. The phrase is standing in your days. I belong here. This is my time, my world. And of course, when we're young, we always think that we're going to live forever. The world is my oyster. It's my generation. We are the best generation has ever been. This is what we all sort of think, if not exactly expressed in those ways, but that's more or less how we look at the world. However, then he goes on, Vayikra Yom, therefore it's called your days, therefore, Omid B'Yomin. Kihem Shaloi, because these are your days. V'kaloshen es mesper yimecha b'mala. Aber kasher yaskin, but when the person gets old, v'yichye, and his yomim rabim, and he's lived many, many, many days, then meroiv b'nei odom b'dora yikra bo b'yomim. Then it's called bo b'yomim. It's coming with his days. But the interesting thing is, because when you're coming with your days, your life is as though you're coming from a different country. There's a famous non-Jewish book that I once had to read, and it starts off with the following words: the past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. Intriguing. This is what the Ramban's saying. A young man in his life, and this is my world. When you get older, your world's different to the new generation, to the new values, to the new era. You're coming with your days, but your days are different to the ones that you're going to find there. Very, very intriguing. That's one explanation of Bo B'Yamin. Another explanation of Bo B'Yamin is that both Avram and Sarah, when they came to heaven, they came with their days. Each day was a perfect witness to the fact that he had filled and she had filled their days with all the positive things they could possibly do in order to cement and grow their relationship with HaShem Yisborach. Each day, they came with those days. No bad days where they just couldn't be bothered getting out of bed, or they couldn't be bothered going to shul. No, these were days that were completely full. Ball b'yomim. This is a beautiful idea. Let's explore that idea a little bit further. And to lead us to where I want to go next, there is a journey we have to go back to this week's Parsha, which is Vayechi. And as we all know, it says there when Yaakov finishes getting from Yosef the undertaking that he's going to do what he says and make sure he's not buried in Mitzrayim. And then Vayama Hishav says, swear this to me. Yishallah and Yosef made the oath to his father that he would keep the promise of not burying him in Mitzrayim. V'yishtachul Yisrael al Rosh Hamita. And Yisrael, Yaakov, bows down to the top of the bed. What does it mean, bows down to the top of the bed? Al Rosh Hamita. Hefech atzma l'tzad Shechina. He turned himself towards the Shechina, the presence of God. Mikan omro shashchina lamala meharashos shalchoila. From which we understand that apparently the presence of God is seen at the head of the bed, around the head of the sick person. At the moments before a person goes away, we know that people, just like Yosef knew, he takes and all his sons come for a blessing from the father in his last minutes. Why? Because the Shekhinah is most intense. The presence of God, the connection between the man who's about to go to Shemayim and Shemayim is now that distance is only wafer thin. And therefore, that closeness allows us to get the maximum access through this person to the blessings of heaven. That's how that works. Now, this is a incredibly interesting and a key to opening a big door in Hashkafa. But let me tell you three stories. Three very, very brief stories. I don't know all the details, or I can't remember, having remembered all the details. There is a book about the life of the Belzer Rebbe. The Belzer Rebbe who survived the Holocaust, even though there was a price on his head, and the Nazis were looking very, very assiduously to try and find him. But he escaped. And of course, came to Eretz Yisrael and rebuilt that Malchus, that wonderful empire of Chassidus, which is incidentally, in case you don't know, Belz an incredibly warm and friendly Chassidus. I've always been very close to Belz Chassidim. Anyway, so basically, when he was escaping from the Nazis, or going from one encounter where he was nearly caught, he was in a wagon, or he was in a carriage or something, car, and it was a checkpoint, and he and his shamus, the person who was accompanying him, they were, as they about to be caught. All the cars in front of them were being inspected, and the Rebbe turned and said to his shamus, "Zog Tehillim," but not just say Tehillim, say the words of Psalms, but with obviously as a prayer to God. Say it with every ounce of sincerity and concentration that you can muster, which he did, and somehow or other, and I've heard many other stories like this, the Nazis somehow just didn't look in that car. The Brisker Rov, now moved from the world of Hasidus to the world of the Yeshivas, the Brisker Rov, an almost identical story, about to be caught by the Nazis, him and another man. Again, he said the exact same thing. Say to him, and again, somehow or other, the Germans didn't look. I've only heard this secondhand. But my brother-in-law, who was a Talmud of Schneider's Yeshiva in London, which previously had been in Frankfurt, on Kristallnacht, when the Nazis were running riot, beating up Jews in the street, Schneider's Yeshiva was in an apartment, in a flat in a building in Frankfurt. And the boys, hearing the screams and the shouts and the violence and the breaking glass down below, looking out the windows, saw the brown shirts and the Nazis spreading through the streets, panicked and made a bolt for the door. But the Rosh Yeshiva, Moshe Schneider, stood there barring their place and said, get back, and Zog Tehillim. I think it was Zog Tehillim, it might have been Learn Torah, but one of the two. And now you got a yeshiva, not some sure the exact numbers there, 60, 100, boys shouting their heads off, saying Tehillim or learning Torah. And somehow the Nazis on the stairwell, coming up the stairs, missed out that whole floor, just didn't hear anything. How could such a thing be? How could such a thing occur? So, just as a little, and I might come back to this next week because it's very exciting, but here is Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz of Mir, one of my very, very favorite stories. And Rabbi Yerucham quotes another pasuk from Tehillim. Tehillim is Tzadik Aleph and Yudalat, and it says, "Ki bi choshek v'avlitehu." In me they desire, and I will save them. I will elevate them. So listen to this. I think it's very interesting. See what you think. So he talks a little bit about what this pasuk means, and he refers back to the previous essay, which we don't have time to go into. And he said, where I quoted the Rambam, Maimonides, and quoting the Rambam is hardly anything extraordinary for any Talmud Chacham. But he's not quoting the Rambam from Moreh Nevuchim or Sefer Mitzvahs, or Perish Mishnayos. He's quoting the Rambam from Moreh Nevuchim. And to quote the Rambam from Moreh Nevuchim, here's mine, that's not so common in yeshiva circles. So he says, when we reach the words of the Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, Tomid Avreno Alehem Ka'al Divrei HaPhilosophia, we tend to ignore and pass over it as though it's merely or is philosophy. And yeshivas are not really interested in classical philosophy. Now, of course, if you've gone through Moreh Nevuchim, you will know that it's in various sections, but some of the sections really are very, very much dealing with the philosophy, the dominant philosophical ideas at the time, which is Aristotle. Aber mitoch devorena Yisborach, sorry. But from the words that I quoted to you last time, and don't worry, I'm going to read them to you in a second, and we see, Eich shekol devorav him Torah HaKadosh. It's obvious that the words of the Rambam, he's not a philosopher. Wait, see what he says in a second about that. This is pure Torah. In fact, so pure Torah that when he quotes the Rambam, which I'm going to read to you in the morning, but he quotes an extract from it here, it's extremely hard to see where it's Rabbi Yerucham speaking or the Rambam speaking. So the Sephardi, who lived in the 11th century, I think, lived in the 11th century in Spain and in Egypt, you could literally take him and drop him into the yeshiva of Mir in Lithuania, and you would not be in any way able to detect that the message and the meaning and the motivation of the shir he's giving would be in any way out of place, just like Rabbi Yerucham's. Intriguing, but listen to this. So he says, "Aber we talked about any Yisbar Lono Eich Shekol Devorav Shodevorav Heim Torah Kadosh Be Yisaidus Bacharei Kodesh." That all of his words are extremely, extremely holy, and they're all based in the highest spiritual ideas. Chalila, God forbid, Chalila Lakshav Sharamam Hoya philosophy. It's forbidden to think, to conceive for a minute, the Rambam was a philosopher. Chas v'shalom. It's astonishing. If you go to the Rambam's hometown, Cordova in Spain, you will find, now Cordova is famous for its manufacture of steel, swords, Spanish swords, etc. But if you go to Cordova, you can visit the Rambam's shul, the shul he used to daven in. Before, of course, he had to flee from the wars between the Muslims and the Christians of those days, and then ending up in Egypt. When you go there, you will find there is a statue outside of an Arabic-looking figure with a turban and long sort of jalaba type dress thing, sitting, looking pensive, and this is the Rambam. At the plinth, the base of the statue, it says Maimonides. I can't remember if it says Rambam, but anyway, but it says he was a politician, medical, he was a doctor, philosoph, he was a philosopher, but it doesn't say Rabino. So, and interestingly, the Rambam's shul had been taken by the church, obviously at the time of the Inquisition, turned into a church, and a couple of decades ago, they gave it back to the Jewish community. However, the laws in Spain say that once a building's been made a church, it can no longer be unmade, really. So you can have it back, but you can't daven there. None of this Jewish stuff, which I think is routinely ignored. But there you go. But it's interesting. What do you want to call him? A politician, medical, and a philosopher, but not a rabbi. But a rabbi, he was, and as his descendant spiritually, Rabbi Yerucham says Chas v'shalom to call him a philosopher. Not at all. But HaShem ain't there philosophy. And B'divuk b'Hashem, anybody, as you see in the words of the Rambam, is so totally attached to Hashem Yisborach, that's nothing to do with philosophy. Called the word of him divrei Torah. Everything he had to say was Torah. The ein behem shum shaychus philosophia, and his Torah, his real words, what he believed, who he was, what he was, had nothing to do with philosophy. Rambam zal chershiv es philosophy abira mashavasem. What you can say about the Rambam was he understood philosophy, understood the philosophers of the time, the ancient Greek philosophers, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and the rest, and he understood their philosophy, but not that he believed in their philosophy. He merely was able to use that as a springboard for ideas. Mishum shemisha in a philosopher, because somebody who's unfamiliar with thinking, having a philosophical mind, then Misha in a Mashal Klal is somebody who doesn't think at all. If you don't think at all, you're damned if I think of Torah, which is above the most difficult and sublime of all thoughts. Interesting. So there's a passionate defense of the Rambam. Let me read a little bit of what the Rambam has to say that he quoted before. And I think you'll find this very interesting. It's very, very rare that people give share in quoting the Morah Nevuchim. Just en passant, but I'll read to you a little bit. This is from the Moster Rav Kook, a beautiful translation from Moster Rav Kook. Of course, it was written in Arabic, so there's plenty of room for mistranslations. Not all the people translated the classic works of the Rishonim, the Sephardi, the Spanish Rishonim, their translations were often flawed, but I think we can rely on the Moser Kook being an excellent translation. But that, if you are a wise person and you understand exactly what God is all about, whenever you separate your thoughts and your mind from God for whatever reason, because you have to eat food, which you do have to eat, or your other work, other things you have to go and do, then relative to the disconnection of your consciousness and your thought on Hashem, then that is how much you lose the shmira, the protection of Hashem. The more you think about Him, the more He thinks of you, or thinks about you, and of you too. At that moment, you're not completely with Him, and therefore, He's not completely with you. Because the connection between you and He, nifsak, has already been interrupted. החסידים מקפידים על הזמנים שהם מסעסקים עשר שלא בוי, והסירו על כך אומרו, אל תפגעו אל מדדיכם. And that's why the great giants of Jewish history were very, very focused, absolutely focused on their real relationship, which was Hashem. Indeed, the Rambam goes on here. We don't have time to go through the whole thing to say what was the word of the Pasuk and Tehillim that we quoted a few seconds ago. The words were Kibi Cheshek. Kibi Cheshek. I am guarding you because you've got Cheshek from me. What's the difference between the word Cheshek and Ahava in Hebrew? Well, you can love lots of people. You can love your parents, and you can love, there's lots of people I love. Wives, children, wives, sorry, I'm not getting very Sephardi. Wives, no. Wife, children, etc. But if it's cheshek means you're obsessed. You can't not think about them. Think about Chos and Nakala, a newly engaged couple. They are on the phone to each other constantly, all the time, can't get them, just thinking about nothing else. What's the positive David Melech says? Kibi chesed. Because you have chesed for me, you're thinking about me all the time. That's when I'm with you, or thinking about you all the time. But if you're disconnected, then that disconnection means that we are disconnected. Let me finish this paragraph. So we said we've learned a paragraph of Morah Nevuchim together. Okay. The more you disconnect from him, the more he disconnects from you. Because for a moment, or for whatever period of time, you have disconnected your thinking about God, and therefore you've disconnected that connection. And we said that's why the Chassidim are more particular to on the amount of time that they could be away from God to be as minimal as possible. And that's why there's a pasuk, and the pasuk tells us don't disconnect. The Gemara in Shabbos talks about this. Don't connect your mind from God. David, Shavisi Hashem negdi tomid, and King David, back to King David. My focus is on you, Hashem, Always. Always. Kenegdi Tomed, Kimi Mini, Bali Mot, I'll never turn away from you. Omar Ani, Law Rakanti Moshavasai Memene Bakaila, who Al Yad Yemini Asher Law is Allah Memeno Herif Ayin Beglau Mehiris Tenuas. It is the notes at the bottom don't quote this, but this is Gemara and Brocha stuff. Hey, if I remember rightly, what constitutes a disconnect from God? A blink. The amount of time it is to blink. That's a disconnect. For the people on the highest level, the Moshes, the Avram, the Yitzhak, the Yaakov, the Sarah, the Rachel, and Leah, their total focus was on HaShem. And even when they were doing other things. Interestingly, how was it that David HaMelech died? Well, he was supposed to die on Shabbos, but Shabbos is when he learned Torah all the time. So the Sultan had a problem. He couldn't get him because he was learning Torah. And Torah protects you, even from death. So he made I had to have a trick. He made the trees sort of like start to make rattling noises as though it was a great wind, but there was no great wind. David HaMelech sees this, still thinking in Torah, goes down to see what's going on, and the Sultan made one of the steps collapse, so he fell. At that moment of falling, he stopped thinking about Torah. That's when he was able to kill him. That's when he was able to get to go upstairs. But David HaMelech, constantly thinking about Hashem Yisbarach. Why is it that people on their deathbeds are able to give brachos? Why is it that in this week's Parsha, as his days are coming towards the end, the days coming towards the end means you're nearly back in Shemaim, and the disconnect between you and Hashem is at its minimum. And therefore, consequently, any bracha that you're able to give, any insight that you're able to get from somebody who's just about to pass the Shemaim, we believe to be extraordinarily, extraordinarily important. Every moment is precious, and you can grow from every moment. That's why Hashem doesn't tell David HaMelech when he's going to die, don't disconnect. I've got a week to live, Reb Chaim Friedlander said to Roshach. What should I work on? Work on your midas, work in your connection to God. The more you do, the more he's with you. The more he's with you, the more bracha you can give to Klal Yisrael. And that, incidentally, the Rambam goes on to say, is the same as it is for an individual, it is for the Jewish people as a whole. The more we're connected with Hashem, the more Hashem's connected with us. And we should all be wonderful, wonderful Shabbos.